Since in this level we've been talking about inflation, let's take a moment to look at income and what is happening to our buying power when there is inflation. So here on this chart you can see the nominal income of the average person in each province in 1928, 1933, and in 2016. All right, so in 1928, the average Albertan made $548 per year. In 2016, the average Albertan makes about $58,000 per year. Now that's a big increase in income. The question is that increase in income just inflation, or has the typical Albertan's buying power, that is what they can get for their money, increased? Are workers more productive than they were back in 1928, so there's more value added? Well, to look at that, we have to take into consideration the amount of inflation. So that means we need to be able to distinguish between nominal income, which is your income in today's dollars, and real income, which is your buying power, what you can get for your money. So we need to take nominal income and we need to adjust for inflation. We need to be able to take out inflation. And we can do this by taking your nominal income and dividing it by the level of inflation, the price level, or the CPI. So we want to know how much you can really get with your money. And really we want to see if you lived in two different places, or if you're trying to decide to move to somewhere else, what would you have to be paid in that new location to get the same access to goods and services as you have in your current location? So we need to be able to compare two different cities based on your income and the cost of living. Or, as we looked at in the previous slide, to be able to compare income over time and see if your buying power has changed. Are you better off? Or is it simply a matter that everything is now more expensive? So the key here is that if nominal income goes up by 30% and inflation goes up by 30%, are you better off? No. Your real income, your buying power, hasn't changed at all. So we want to know, has our real income, our buying power, has it changed? So let's look at that example of 1928, 29, and 1933, and essentially today. So if you were in Alberta in 1928, you would have made about $548 in that whole year. Now granted, everything was cheaper back then. So what is $548 in 1928 worth today? To figure that out, we take that $548, okay, and then what we have to do is we have to divide it by the cost of living in that year. So we need a consumer price index for that year, and it was about 9.1 for Canada. The reason we're using Canada, even though we're trying to look at Alberta, is because Statistics Canada didn't track inflation in the provinces that far back. So let's just go with Canadian price indexes right now. So you would have made $548 in 1928. The consumer price index then was 9.1. If you want to compare it to today, you need to use today's consumer price index, so 128.4. So if we take 548, we divide it by 9.1, and we multiply 128.4, then what we find is that $548 back in 1928 is the same as making $7,732 today. So even after we adjust for inflation, people back in 1928 would have only been making $7,700 a year. Well, what about 1933? Here's the peak of the Great Depression. Notice that if you lived in Alberta in 1933, your average income would have been $212 for the whole year. Granted, things were cheaper then, but how much is that today? What would that be like earning today? To find that, we take our $212, divide by the CPI in that year, and multiply it times the year that we're looking at. So we're converting it into 2016 dollars here. So let's take our 212 divided by 7.1 times 128.4. And if you lived in 1933 and made $212 a year, that would be like making $3,834 today. Can you live off that? Now that's pretty terrible for an income, and so we can see the impact of the Great Depression and how much it hurt in terms of pay. Now in this level, what you're going to do is do the same kind of calculation, but compare different locations. So compare Alberta to the rest of Canada. Compare it to the US. What would your income be like in those three different locations based on your cost of living? So again, you'll need your CPI, and you'll need to take an income and look at what is that equivalent to in the three different locations. What's your buying power? How much would you need to make in a different location to be equivalent to what you're making here? And you can use that decision to help you decide whether or not that job offer you've gotten and the wage or salary that they're offering is worth moving to get. What's been happening to our real income over time? Well, on Blackboard, you can see a couple Dilbert cartoons that make jokes about the fact that we're all getting poorer, that our real income is declining, that our nominal income, our paycheck, is not growing as fast as inflation. Well, is that true? Well, here you can see earnings of the average Canadian, and then in red you can see inflation. So there was a decade where our earnings were growing faster than inflation, and before that inflation seemed to be growing faster than our earnings. So it seems to be a bit of a leapfrog game here in Canada. In the US, it's much worse. Their earnings have not kept up with inflation, so they continue to see a decline in their real income more than we have here. So here you can see real wages, our buying power, hasn't really increased. It's been fairly flat, maybe a little bit of a dip. Nominal wages have gone up, so most of the wage increases we've been getting have been cost of living adjustments. They've been increases in wages because of inflation, not because of increase in productivity or in value added by the workforce. We can actually look at earnings by province as we're talking about earnings here. So what province do you think has higher earnings? While we're on the topic of earnings, let's just take a look here. Here you can see the average weekly earnings by province, and 2016 is that far right column. And so you can see in Alberta, the average income, we make about $1,100 a week. So the income in Alberta is much higher than it is in other provinces. Now, if you take into consideration inflation, the question is how does our buying power compare? So just because you're getting paid more, are you able to buy more stuff? Well, you'll take a look at that in the challenge and figure out what kind of buying power you have in Alberta versus the rest of Canada.